Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating, deeply critical source that takes a really hard look at the explosive world of crypto, NFTs, and Web3. We're going on a wild journey through 13 years of financial history, massive technological claims, and huge cultural shifts. And let me tell you, this source material absolutely does not pull any punches. It challenges basically everything you might have heard about digital assets.
So let's dive right in by framing the central conflict presented right at the start of our source. On one hand, you've got proponents claiming this is the biggest technological shift since the invention of the internet itself. But on the other hand, skeptics highlighted in our source argue that it's really nothing more than a massive mechanism to get rich quick, totally fueled by hype and delusion. So, which is it? Are we looking at a reimagined financial future or the absolute greatest Ponzi scheme in human history?
To figure out exactly how this ecosystem evolved, here's our roadmap. First, we'll look at the promise of Bitcoin, then the ICO casino, followed by the NFT illusion, Web3 and play to earn, and the venture capital machine. Finally, we'll wrap up with that big question, revolution or Ponzi scheme?
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the promise of Bitcoin, from anarchists to Wall Street. To really understand this, we have to go back to the very beginning, to the kind of mysterious origins of this technology and its original anti-establishment goals. The context here is absolutely crucial. Picture it. It's 2008. The global financial crash is just devastating economies worldwide. People are losing their homes. Their retirement funds are vanishing. And right in the middle of all this chaos, an anonymous figure, or maybe a group, we still don't know, named Satoshi Nakamoto, publishes a white paper proposing a brand new electronic cash system. By January 2009, the first Bitcoins actually launch. The source points out that this was literally the perfect stage. Early adopters, like techno-anarchists and libertarians, they absolutely loved the idea of a decentralized currency that wasn't controlled by untrustworthy banks or governments. It felt like a righteous revolution.
But, well, here's where that original dream hits a massive brick wall. The whole point was that Bitcoin was supposed to be a global, everyday currency, right? But just consider the data. Bitcoin can process about 7 transactions per second. 7. Compare that to Visa at 1,700 or MasterCard at 5,000. The source argues that because of these severe technical bottlenecks, Bitcoin basically failed fundamentally as a scalable global currency. You add in the absolutely massive, wasteful energy consumption required just to run the network, and it became pretty clear that people weren't buying Bitcoin to go buy a cup of coffee. They were buying it simply hoping the price would go up.
Which brings us to Section 2, the ICO casino and creating money from thin air. Fast forward to 2015, and Ethereum launches. Think of it like Bitcoin, but programmable. This was a real game changer because it allowed anyone to easily create their own digital assets, called tokens, without having to build a whole new blockchain from scratch. And this brilliantly illustrates what happened next. We entered the initial coin offering, or ICO, mania of 2017. Literally anyone could write a quick white paper, launch a token, and raise millions. Just look at some of these examples from the source. Jesus Coin, which actually promised to decentralize miracles, no joke. Then there was Ponzi Coin, which explicitly told investors it was a scam, and yet it still raised $250,000. And CenterTech, they used massive celebrity endorsements to raise millions before the founders were literally sent to prison. According to the source, the crypto space had basically transformed into a highly speculative, completely unregulated casino.
Moving on to Section 3, the NFT illusion, digital art and artificial hype.
So, as that whole ICO craze naturally died down, the crypto ecosystem desperately needed a brand new narrative to keep bringing in fresh money. Enter the NFT, or non-fungible token. Simply put, it's a unique digital token recorded on a blockchain, usually marketed as a way to digitally verify the ownership of art. The source makes a fantastic comparison here. Think of them as digital Beanie Babies. It was wild. Suddenly you had massive celebrities buying pictures of cartoon apes for hundreds of thousands of dollars, changing their profile pictures just to flex their new digital wealth to the world.
In this hype, it reached an absolute fever pitch with one jaw-dropping number, $69.3 million. That is exactly how much an everyday digital artwork by an artist named Beeple sold for at auction. It made headlines all over the globe, but the source digs a bit deeper into this specific transaction. The buyer was a crypto entrepreneur going by the name Metacovin. And guess what? It turns out Metacovin and his business partner already owned a massive supply of a related token called B20. The source strongly suggests that this insane $69 million purchase was essentially just a giant marketing stunt, designed to artificially inflate the value of the crypto tokens they were already holding.
And here is where we get a serious technological reality check.
When you hear a phrase like digital ownership on the blockchain, you probably picture the artwork securely locked away in some high-tech digital vault, right? But in reality, you are very often just buying a database entry that contains a public web link, like an HTTPS or IPFS link, to an image hosted somewhere else entirely. Anyone on the internet can right-click and save the exact same image. You are basically just buying a receipt with a hyperlink on it. It completely contrasts the grand, sweeping claims of digital ownership that were being sold to the public.
Let's head into Section 4, Web 3, and Play to Earn, the tokenization of everything.
As the general public kind of started to catch on and reject NFTs, the hype machine had to pivot yet again. Suddenly, the term Web3 was everywhere, promising this completely new, decentralized internet. Proponents were arguing that we should put everything, real estate, healthcare, legal contracts, on the blockchain. But the source shares this really powerful quote from UC Berkeley's Nicholas Weaver to critically examine all this. He says, when somebody says you can solve X with blockchain, they don't understand X and you can just ignore them. The source characterizes this entire era as a classic case of a solution desperately searching for a problem, trying to force blockchain into industries where it honestly added zero practical value.
But perhaps the darkest iteration of this whole Web3 push was play-to-earn gaming, specifically a wildly popular game called Axie Infinity. To even play this game and earn crypto, you had to buy these really expensive NFT characters. So wealthy investors, who are called managers, would buy up the NFTs and basically rent them out to low-income players in developing nations who are known as scholars. These scholars would grind the game for hours on end just to earn a meager living while the managers took a massive cut of the profits. The source argues that this wasn't some glorious financial revolution at all, it was just the exploitation of vulnerable workers simply to generate yields for early investors. And shocker, when the influx of new players eventually stopped, the token's value crashed by 99%, leaving those workers with absolutely nothing.
That brings us to Section 5, the venture capital machine, and following the big money.
So you might be wondering, who exactly is funding all of this? Well, massive venture capital firms like Andreessen Horowitz have poured literal billions into the crypto space. And the source breaks down a highly critical assertion of exactly why they do this, outlining a pretty straightforward three-step exit strategy. Step 1, they invest super early in a crypto startup. Step 2, instead of waiting years and years for traditional stock IPO, they receive unregistered crypto tokens very, very quickly. And step 3, once the hype builds up, they just dump those tokens on average retail investors for massive, highly unregulated profits. The general public buys in, hoping for a huge financial gain, while the insiders quietly cash out.
Now, for a system like this to actually survive, it absolutely requires everyday people to never sell their tokens. And this brilliantly explains the bizarre culture of the crypto community that you've probably seen all over social media. It is strategically designed to stop people from cashing out. Just think about these terms. HODL, which means hold on for dear life. WAGMI, or we're all going to make it. Having diamond hands means you never, ever sell, even when you're actively losing money. And if anyone dares to point out the flaws, they're instantly accused of spreading FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It's essentially this forced, toxic positivity designed to keep retail money locked in the machine so the early adopters can safely exit.
Finally, Section 6, Revolution or Ponzi Scheme, the verdict.
It is time to weigh the original, lofty promises of crypto against the stark reality of the source's findings. The source highlights a massive, glaring number here: 13 years. It has been 13 years since Bitcoin first launched. To put that into perspective, 13 years after the birth of the internet, we already had widespread emails, weather reports, and massive global utility. But 13 years into crypto? Despite billions of dollars in endless rebranding, from coins to ICOs to NFTs to Web3, the space is still desperately searching for a single solid mainstream use case outside of pure financial speculation.
According to the critics cited in our source today, the entire system essentially relies on a continuous influx of new money, completely fueled by hype, just to pay out the early investors. And if that's true, it leaves us with one final deeply provocative question to consider. At what point does the ticking time bomb actually go off? What happens to the millions of regular people holding digital tokens when the new money finally inevitably stops flowing in? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to always keep asking the hard questions.